The teaching will be in English, then Chinese, and is scheduled for 1 hour, including Q&A. Now we are ready for the teaching. May we invite Bhante to start the teaching, please. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Bhante, can you open the video? Yes.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. kiṃsu chetvā sukhaṃ seti, kiṃsu chetvā socati, kissassu ekadhammassa, vadhaṃ rocesi gotamā, kodhaṃ chetvā sukhaṃ seti, kodhaṃ chetvā socati. Kodhassa visamūlassa, madhuraggassa devate, vadhaṃ ariyā pasaṃsanti, tañhi chetvā socatī. Having slain what, does one sleep soundly? Having slain what, does one not sorrow? What is the one thing, O Gotama, whose killing you approve? Having slain anger, one sleeps soundly. Having slain anger, one does not sorrow. The killing of anger, O devatā, with its poisoned root and honeyed tip, this is the killing the noble ones praise. For having slain that, one does not sorrow. So welcome to our second session of our Vasa 2025 Dhamma Talk series. You may have recognized that verse there. It's from the Sagatha Vagga of the Samyutta Nikaya. Now, when we have, for those who know, this particular section of the Samyutta Nikaya is concerned with, it's mostly small suttas. And so each of these little suttas, most of them are riddles. And so the first part of this Sagatha Vagga has questions from devatas. So this is from a deva. And then so the Buddha has answered this riddle. And it's one of the most famous riddles in the collection. And it also matches quite well with a question that a lot of people are asking at the monastery. People are coming and asking how to control their anger. So I thought we could take this as a topic today and explore what the Buddha has to say about it. Now, before we go to the Chinese, we have to understand that this question doesn't have only one answer. There are many different techniques that the Buddha taught for dealing with anger, and so we have to check the situation and try to understand all of the factors before coming to a conclusion. 消灭什么事物人可以安眠呢？消灭什么事物人就没有忧愁呢？到底是什么事物啊？乔达摩，到底需要断除是哪一种事物可以呢？乔达摩，消灭了愤怒，人就可以安眠；消灭了愤怒，人就没有忧愁。所以要断除愤怒，天生啊，这愤怒看似花间有蜜，而根却有剧毒。断除愤怒是被圣人所赞成的，断除愤怒后就不再忧愁了。大家好，欢迎参加我们2025年圆寂的第二次佛法讲座。可能很多人已认出了这开场的偈颂，它出自相应部的有机品 socatī。这个句子代表了所有佛教国家在寺院中最常被提问的其中一个著名的谜题：如何应对愤怒？所以这似乎这个很适合今天探讨我们的，就是很适合今天探讨的一个话题。如果你们该如何对治愤怒这个问题有下意识的答案，我会建议这是个可以有多个适合答案的议题，每种情况都需要根据其具体的细节来考量。So anger, like all mental states, it has two sets of conditions. We have an internal set and an external set. And so we have to, if we can understand the different factors that lead to the rising of anger, then we can understand how we can alter these in a way that would lead to the ending of anger. Of course, this is in a one talk we can't explain everything, but at least we can get some hints about how to control anger in daily life. So there's a famous story in Canada, and it's called Anne of Green Gables. It's a children's novel about a little girl who was adopted by an elderly pair, a brother and a sister, an unmarried brother and sister, and so they ended up adopting this little girl. So it's an incredibly famous story that many children will have studied in school. And in one part of the novel, Anne is she envies her aunt for having a beautiful amethyst brooch. And so one day she goes up to her aunt's room. Her aunt's name is Marilla. She goes up to Aunt Marilla's room and she puts it on her, she pins it on her dress just to see how it will look. And she put it back on the shelf and forgot about it. Unfortunately, the next day, Marilla came down and it seems that the brooch had disappeared. And Anne was forced to admit that it was her she had tried on the brooch, but she said that she had put it right back. Now, Marilla didn't believe this. She said, there's no brooch there. Someone must have took it, and that someone was you. And until you admit that, I'm going to lock you up in your bedroom. And so she spent one night grounded. She was stuck in her bedroom and she didn't have any other choice. So she made up a story. And the story was that she had taken the brooch outside. She really liked the way it looked. She'd worn it. She'd taken it outside and then it had fallen into the lake and she had lost it. Quite a long story. And so when Aunt Marilla hears this, she was quite upset. And she doesn't decide to lift the punishment. She continues to punish Anne, right? Until later she finds the brooch and she realizes that she had accidentally misplaced it. And she realized her mistake. Huan nu 就像所有的心理状态一样，是由内在、外在、过去与现在多种杂件交汇而生。让我们来看一个例子，以了解其运作的原理。在我的祖国，有一本非常受欢迎的儿童的读物叫绿山枪的安妮，讲述了两位没有孩子的年老姐弟 收养了一个年轻女孩的故事。这个女孩名叫安妮，她的养母名叫玛丽拉。安妮对玛丽拉的一颗紫水晶胸针非常着迷，于是有一天她偷偷拿去试戴，想看看效果如何。不幸的不久后，玛丽拉发现胸针不见了。在追问下，安妮被迫承认是她拿了胸针去试戴。她一开始将自己立刻放回了原处，但玛丽拉不相信，认为安妮在说谎。他将安妮关在房间里作为惩罚。安妮为了离开房间，他就编造了一个长篇故事，讲述了他把胸针带到外面，以后弄丢了，直到玛丽拉最终找到了胸针，这个谎言才被拆穿。So in this story, then we have some internal causes and some external causes. So we can see that the aunt or the foster mother, Marilla, she's become angry because she lost her precious brooch. So she has the perception that this item, this brooch, has some value to her. And so because of that, she's upset. But she's also upset because she's afraid for the sake of her stepdaughter, for Annie. And she's afraid that she might become a dishonest person when she grows up. If she's acting this way at this age, then how will she act when she grows up? So we have a series of different conditions based on Marilla's past experience and perceptions. 在这个故事，玛丽拉之所以生气是因为她丢失了胸针，并认为安妮为此撒了谎。这些都是外在的诱因，内在的原因则是由于过去的认知和经历所造成的。比如，胸针对他来说是件珍贵的物品，并认为会撒谎的孩子长大后不会成为一个诚实的人。当他找到了胸针，并意识到是自己胁迫安妮做出了虚假的供述，愤怒才得以消解。So it's not that complicated to understand the situation. Many people can empathize with it. The reason I chose this particular story is because a lot of parents are faced with this sort of situation. And the situation is simply they're upset about something, but at the same time, they have to make a decision. This can happen at work, but especially, as I mentioned, it will happen to parents if a child has done something wrong, or if they're accused of doing something wrong by their teacher or by the principal at school. And you can be upset about the situation, but you can't just sit down and try to meditate. You can't just sit down and focus on your breath. So under this kind of situation, we have a few different options. And one thing we can do is try to split the situation into two different aspects. So that would be how to make the decision and how to calm down afterwards. 这个故事内容很容易理解， 但我特别挑选了这个故事，还有另外一个原因。当你情绪激动时，却又要做出决定时，该怎么办？父母经常会遇到这样的情况。当然，孩子在行为不当时是需要得到一些教训，但当我们生气的时候，往往会做出错误的判断，就像故事中的玛丽拉一样。有时我们必须在还没有完全冷静下来之前做出决定，无论是在家里还是在工作场合。So for the first uh, part, I said we were going to divide this into two sections about how to deal with the situation and then how to settle down afterwards. And often the best way to deal with the situation is to make a bit of a plan ahead of time. So you can think of the example of athletes on the field. If you're in the US, you can think of American football, or if you're in a different country, maybe you can think of soccer or something. But the athletes train with a certain game plan. And so they have certain sort of strategies that they can employ in certain situations. And so in life, it's quite similar. So if you have a plan how you might act ahead of time, and then when you're upset, you can stick to that plan and you know that you won't go too far. Especially with children, sometimes you can even have an agreement ahead with a child, like if this happens, if you do this, this would be the punishment or something like that. But also at work, if you know that frequently you get in trouble, like if your boss frequently gets upset about this or that, then you can make a plan ahead of time, like what kinds of things that you will say or won't say to your boss, or what kind of things you might do to resolve the situation. Of course, we can't prepare for every kind of situation that might arise. This is impossible. But in that situation where something comes out of left field, are you not expecting something? Then we have our precepts. So at least our precepts will keep us within some kind of acceptable bounds of behavior and prevent us from making a choice that we will regret later. 处理这种情况的一个方法是将问题分为两部分：如何行动以及如何恢复内心的平衡。对于第一部分，可以先制定一个行动计划，会很有帮助。就像运动员在赛场上一样，如果有一个好比赛计划，就很容易避免冲动做出错误的决定。当然，我们不可能为所有的状况都做好准备，但这时候我们的无解就会派上用场了。无论情况如何，至少我们的戒律能将我们的行动保持在一定的规范之内。当谈到小组愤怒，我们可以先以我们主要的禅修所缘作为起点，所以这是第二部分，尝试不同的方法，看看哪种方法有效。比如行禅、坐禅，在家中佛台前供灯或者念诵经文，或任何有益身心的活动。你也可以尝试一些平常的活动，比如骑自行车、喝杯茶、洗个热水澡，甚至和朋友聊天。 So for the second part, once we've dealt with the situation in some reasonable way, according to our plan, according to the precepts, then we have to try to find a way to cool down our minds. And so our first line of defense is usually our main meditation object, because hopefully you've chosen a meditation object that is very powerful for you, very suited to you, and that will help you calm down more quickly. Now, sometimes a meditation object is not the right choice. So our main meditation object is not the right choice. We can try different things. We could try different postures, walking meditation or lying. We could try lying down. We can try some simple wholesome activities like offering an oil lamp to the Buddha Rupa at your home altar, or doing some chanting, some paritta chanting, if that sort of thing cheers you up. Sometimes none of these sort of Buddhist activities are that helpful if you're very upset. In that case, you can choose some sort of activity, a neutral activity. For example, you can go for a bike ride or for a walk in the forest. Or you can have a cup of tea, take a warm shower, or go chat with a friend. All of these things are actually wholesome activities if you're doing them with the intention of removing anger from your mind. So they don't count as meditation in the sense as leading to deep samadhi, but they do count under right effort. But the Chinese and the English are out of sync now. So I will get the English back in front of the Chinese. So sometimes the Buddha would give, he has another technique. So in addition to the techniques I just mentioned, one technique that the Buddha would use is to give a verse for reflection, remembering that in Indian culture, it was very much an oral culture. They either didn't have much writing or they didn't have writing at all. But people's memories were excellent, absolutely outstanding. So we have some examples from the Samyutta Nikaya, when King Kosala is trying to lose weight in the Samyutta Nikaya, the third Samyutta, Sutta 13. The Buddha gives him a verse about the benefits of moderation in eating. And King Kosala, he invites his cook to recite it to him whenever he's eating. And sometime later, he's able to lose weight. And also he gets married. He finds another queen not that long after that. We also have the example of Chulapantaka, the Arahant Chulapantaka, who is considered to be very unintelligent. But the Buddha gave him this verse, and he gave him a white cloth to recite this verse, something like Rajo Haranang. It means like removing dirt or something like that. And he was able to attain Arahant by reflecting on this verse. But more to the point, we have some examples. We have an example in the story of Prince Digavu. The story of Prince Digavu, his father gives him a verse about not seeking revenge and about forgiving. He gives this verse right before he is executed. And so Prince Digavu, this is a story from the Vinaya. And so Prince Digavu is able to prevent himself from killing another king when he gets the chance to take revenge on the king who has taken the lives of his parents. He remembers this verse and he spares their lives. And he also spares himself the bad karma he would have made by such an action. So what kind of verse to choose if you like this? One way to do it is to simply use the verse that we we started with today about the slaying of anger. You can choose another verse, this Nahiverena Verani Sammante de Kudachanam, this verse from the Dhammapada. Not through hatred is hatred stilled, that verse. Any verse that's of a suitable length, that is easy to remember, pleasant to remember for you. It's something that you're willing to reflect on again and again. Because if you don't make it a habit, if you don't reflect on it, say every day or a few times a day, then it won't really be there when you need it, when you're upset. But this is definitely an effective way of trying to bring ourselves to restore balance to our minds once we've become angry. 有时佛陀会送出一首寄语给人来思考，例如波斯匿王试图减肥，相应部3.13，以及朱利潘陀家的故事。在提迦波王子的故事中，他的父亲送给了他一首偈子，一个关于不寻求报复而选择宽恕的一段寄语。他在关键时刻适时记起了这段寄语，从而阻止了他自己杀死了一位国王。你也可以选择我们今天开场的那首偈子，或者选择任何建议，意思恰当，篇幅简短，便于记忆和经常思考的寄送。我刚刚送了Nahiverena Verani，就是比较流行的一个寄语，在法句经。佛陀还建议通过反思不善念头的危险来处理它们，例如中部20经在政治部里还有一篇经文列出了愤怒的一些危害。So we have another method that the Buddha has given, and that is to reflect on the dangers of anger. And so we have, especially in this Vitakkasaṇṭhāna Sutta, this is reflecting on the dangers of unwholesome thoughts is one method that's recommended. But today we're going to look at one sutta from the Anguttara Nikāya, Sutta number 64 in the sevens. Keep in mind, different collections of Tipitaka collections have slightly different numbering for the Anguttara Nikāya. But anyway, you'll recognize the sutta about seven things that will gratify your enemy when you become angry. So I'm going to try to keep it in sync. So I'll read one in English, and then the translation in English is by Ajahn Sujato, and then I will read the translation in Chinese, which is, I believe it's been translated from the English. Mendicants, these 7 things that please and assist an enemy happen to an irritable man or woman. What 7? Firstly, an enemy wishes for an enemy. If only they'd become ugly. Why is that? Because an enemy doesn't like to have a beautiful enemy. An irritable individual, overcome and overwhelmed by anger, is ugly, even though they're nicely bathed and anointed, with hair and beard dressed, and wearing white clothes. This is the first thing that pleases and assists an enemy, which happens to an irritable man or woman. 诸比丘，一个易愤怒的女人或男人会遭遇7种令其敌人欢喜和注意敌人的事情，是哪7件事呢？首先， 人们希望对自己的仇人说，但愿敌人变得丑陋。为什么呢？因为不喜欢自己的敌人是美丽的。当一个易怒的人被愤怒所淹没征服，即使他们目无清洁，涂抹了香油，并梳头剃须，穿着洁白的衣服，也仍会显得丑陋，而这正是让其敌人感到高兴而欣慰的事情。这种事情容易发生在脾气暴躁的女人或男人身上。Furthermore, an enemy wishes for an enemy. If only they'd sleep badly. Why is that? Because an enemy doesn't like to have an enemy who sleeps at ease. An irritable individual. Maybe I'll comment. I'll comment a little bit in between the different verses. So the first one is saying that when somebody becomes angry, they become ugly. And so you can think about if you have if you see somebody, maybe your brother or sister gets angry, you don't want to look at them. You want to go away, right? You don't like to be near somebody who's angry. So it's quite a simple meaning. Like on the surface, they look like unpleasant. 我就解释一下，就是如果人和人生气了，他们就是比较简单的意思，你不喜欢跟他们交流，你看他们看似比较丑陋，就是没有其他的的意思。So I'll move on to the second one. 第二个呢 Furthermore, an enemy wishes for an enemy. If only they'd sleep badly. Why is that? Because an enemy doesn't like to have an enemy who sleeps at ease. An irritable individual, overcome and overwhelmed by anger, sleeps badly, even though they sleep on a couch spread with woolen covers, shag-piled, pure white, or embroidered with flowers, and spread with a fine deer hide, with a canopy above and red pillows at both ends. This is the second thing. 其次，人们希望自己的敌人说，但愿他们睡不好。为什么呢？因为人们不希望自己的敌人睡得安稳。当一个易怒的人被愤怒所淹没征服，即使睡得铺着长毛、纯白、绣着花的上品鹿皮垫子，上有棚等，两端放着红色的枕头的床榻上，他会睡不好。这是第二件事，这也是比较容易理解。就是如果你生气的话，没有办法睡觉，就是有很多的妄念啊，所以没有办法睡觉。So this one also is pretty simple, right? When you're upset, instead of sleeping well, your mind just runs around about the same issues again and again. So there are also some stories in the Dhammapada commentary about this verse. There's a verse about this verse, Dhammapada verse, long is the night. The third one. Furthermore, an enemy wishes for an enemy, if only their needs are not easily satisfied. Why is that? Because an enemy doesn't like to have an enemy whose needs are amply satisfied. When an irritable individual, overcome and overwhelmed by anger, gets what they don't need, they think, I've got what I need. When they get what they need, they think, I've got what I don't need. When an angry person gets these things that are exact opposite of what they need, it is for their lasting harm and suffering. This is the third thing. 再次，人们希望 对自己的仇人说，但愿敌人的需求得不到满足。当一个易怒的人被愤怒所淹没征服的时候，得到他们所不需要的东西时，他们会以为我得到了我需要的东西。当得到需要的东西的时候，他们又认为我得到了我不需要的东西。当一个愤怒的人得到的东西是与他所需要的完全相反的时候，他们会遭受长久的伤害和痛苦。这是第三件事。所以这是因为如果我们我们生气的话，我们的心态还是有三种的烦恼，贪嗔痴。所以因为吃存在，所以我们的智慧不在了，所以我们有这样的错觉，会做这样的错误。So the reason for this is that when we're angry, we also have this factor of moha or delusion present. Because of that, our wisdom doesn't come into play. We make sorts of misjudgments about what we need and what we don't need. The fourth one. Furthermore, an enemy wishes for an enemy, if only they weren't wealthy. Why is that? Because an enemy doesn't like to have an enemy who's wealthy. When an individual is irritable, overcome, and overwhelmed by anger, the rulers seize the legitimate wealth they've earned by their efforts, built up with their own hands, gathered by the sweat of the brow. This is the fourth thing. So the meaning seems to be the commentary doesn't mention the meaning, but it seems to be that when you get upset, you're likely to break the rules or do something that might cross the wishes of a king or a governor. And because of that, then they're more likely to confiscate your goods. 故此，人们希望对自己的仇人说：“但愿敌人不富有。”为什么呢？因为人们不希望自己的敌人富裕。当一个易怒的人被愤怒所淹没征服的时候，他们通过辛勤努力、汗水劳动所换来的合法财富，将会因得罪统治者给轻易的没收了。这是第四件事。Coming to the fifth one. Furthermore, an enemy wishes for an enemy, if only they weren't famous. Why is that? Because an enemy doesn't like to have a famous enemy. When an individual is irritable, overcome, and overwhelmed by anger, any fame they have acquired by diligence falls to dust. This is the fifth thing. So I think it's important to keep in mind in most cultures we have a difference between fame and infamy. I think in the present day, to some extent, infamy and fame have become a bit mixed up. So sometimes people will do something in order to become infamous, but the meaning here is that fame in the sense of a good reputation that is spread around. That's what will be lost if one misbehaves due to anger. 故此，人们希望对自己的仇人说：“但愿他们没有名声。”为什么呢？因为人们不喜欢自己的敌人有名气。当一个易怒的人被愤怒所淹没征服的时候，他们通过努力所获得的名誉会化为尘土。这是第五件事。I think in translation in Chinese is clearer than the English translation sometimes. No need to explain there. For the sixth one, furthermore, an enemy wishes for an enemy, if only they had no friends. Why is that? Because an enemy doesn't like to have an enemy with friends. When an individual is irritable, overcome and overwhelmed by anger, their friends and colleagues, relatives and kin avoid them from afar. This is the sixth thing. 故自人们希望对自己的仇人说，但愿他们没有朋友。为什么呢？因为人们不喜欢自己的敌人有朋友。当一个易怒的人被愤怒所淹没征服的时候，他们的友人、同事、亲戚和家人会远远避开他们。这是第六件事。所以，特别是因为如果你生气的话，可能会骂别人，所以你的朋友和亲戚人不喜欢跟你交流。So especially when you get upset, you're more likely to speak harsh words towards your friends or your family or your coworkers, and for that reason, they won't like to associate with you. And also, of course, it's easy to break a friendship. Don't forget that a few words placed at the wrong time can really ruin a relationship. Furthermore, an enemy wishes for an enemy, if only when their body breaks up after death, they're reborn in a place of loss, a bad place, the underworld, hell. Why is that? Because an enemy doesn't like to have an enemy who goes to a good place. When an individual is irritable, overcome and overwhelmed by anger, they do bad things by way of body, speech, and mind. When their body breaks up after death, they're reborn in a place of loss, a bad place, the underworld, hell. This is the seventh thing that pleases and assists an enemy, which happens to an irritable man or woman. These are the seven things that please and assist an enemy, which happen to an irritable woman or man. 故此，人们希望对自己的仇人说，但愿他们身坏命终后，投生入恶趣，不善趣地狱。为什么呢？因为人们不喜欢自己的敌人投生善趣。当一个易怒的人被愤怒所淹没征服的时候，他们会以身、口、意造作恶业，身坏命终后，投生于恶道、不善趣、有冥界、地狱。这是第七件事其仇人欢喜，有注意之事。这样的事情经常发生在容易愤怒的女人跟男人身上。以上是发生在易怒女人和男人的身上，令其仇人欢喜，却跳且注意仇人的七件事。So these seven things are connected with. I know it's hard sometimes to keep track of why we're talking about this. So we're talking about this because one of the ways the Buddha recommended to overcome anger is to reflect on the dangers of anger. And so to choose a sutta like this can be very helpful to overcome this anger. 我给大家提醒一下，就是为什么我们刚刚听到这篇经文就是因为我们在考虑怎么去除愤怒，所以佛陀说考虑愤怒的缺点、危害是一个办法，我们可以用的一个办法。So we can reflect on these seven dangers, and perhaps it will help us to remove anger from our mind. 所以形似这七件事可能会比较容易帮助我们去除愤怒，去除生气。 We didn't discuss the most direct way of removing anger, and this is recommended in the Visuddhimagga. I mean, this is the typical thing that the Buddha mentions as the antidote to anger, and that is metta, or loving kindness. And so we won't discuss all of the detailed instructions that are available in the Visuddhimagga. Typically, we're asked to start by sending metta to ourselves. And it's important to understand that metta is not the same as, we've translated it as loving kindness. It's not exactly the same as what that might indicate in ordinary English. So metta is this wish for another person to be happy or for oneself to be happy. And so typically we have these four aspects. And there are different translations for these four. In Pali, we have, for ourselves, it would be anigo homi. It's the first one, abhyapajo homi. Sorry, it's avero homi, abhyapajo homi, anigo homi, sukhiyatanang pariharami. So we have these four aspects. And one way of translating them is anigo can be translated as be free of, avero homi can be free of enmity. Anigo homi, sometimes it's translated as be free of physical suffering. Sometimes it's translated as be free of difficulties. Abhyapajo homi, sometimes translated as be free of mental suffering. And sukhiyatanang pariharami, may I take care of myself happily. But the gist of it is that through these four wishes are supposed to encompass all kinds of suffering. And so it's supposed to be wishing yourself happy in all aspects of your life. So through these four different words. So don't worry if you come across a different translation. Now, the Visuddhimagga explains in quite high detail how to develop this meditation object, going through different classes of individuals and then the different directions and practicing the level of jhana concentration and moving on to the other Brahma viharas. For somebody who doesn't have a lot of time, or they don't have deep concentration yet, they can start just by focusing on these four words. They can try to send metta to themselves, and then they can generally try to spread metta to all beings. Later, if you get a chance to join a retreat, because it takes a more extended period of time to develop this object. But if you have a chance to join a meditation retreat, you can get detailed instructions from a teacher and you can develop it more thoroughly. So this is, as I said, it's the way that the Buddha would typically list as the antidote to anger, is this loving kindness. 在巴黎经藏中，佛陀指导通过培养慈心来断除愤怒。清净导论建议，修习慈心的人应首先思维愤怒所造成的过患和安稳的利益，在这个基础上，先培育对自己安乐的追愿。对于想要深入修习自信的人，可以从4个方面下手。愿我没有敌意，avero homi。愿我没有嗔害，abhyapajo homi。愿我没有忧苦，anigo homi。愿我保持快乐，sukhiyatanang pariharami。这些寄送存有不同的翻译，但总体来说，其所传达的要义是愿我在各方面都幸福快乐。在清净道论中， 详细解释了禅修者可能面临的障碍以及修习慈心所应遵从的次第。在初学阶段，禅修者只需要培育慈心给自己即可，进而也尽可能尝试对所有众生散播慈心。如有因缘参加长期的禅修营，禅修者可向老师请求更详细完整的慈心教导。So we have, before we finish the main part of the talk, we actually have a question left over from last time. So to conclude the last part of the talk, I'll read a verse from the Itivuttaka, and this is translated by John D. Ireland. It's this 27th sutta. Maybe I'll read, I will chant it in Pali first, and then English, and then Chinese. Yo chamatang bhavayati appamanang patisato tanu sangyojana honti passato padikkhayang ekampi che panamadutta citto mettayati kusalo tena hoti sambe cha pane masunukampang Bahutamario pakaroti punyang ye satta sandang pataving vijinva rajasayo yajamana rupayaga asamedang purisamedang samapasang vajapayang niragalang mettassa chittassa simbhavitassa kalampite nanubhavanti solasing Chandappabathagaranavasambe Yonahanti ghateti nadinani dajapaye Matang so sambhabhute suverang tasana chiti. For one who mindfully develops boundless loving kindness, seeing the destruction of clinging, the fetters are worn away. If, with an uncorrupted mind, he pervades just one being with loving, kindly thoughts, he makes some merit thereby. But a noble one produces an abundance of merit by having a compassionate mind towards all living beings. Those royal seers who conquered the earth crowded with beings went about performing sacrifices, the horse sacrifice, the man sacrifice, the water rites, the soma sacrifice, and that called the unobstructed. But these do not share even a 16th part of a well-cultivated mind of love. Just as the entire starry host is dimmed by the moon's radiance, one who does not kill, nor cause others to kill, who does not conquer, nor cause others to conquer, kindly towards all beings, he has enmity for none. Again, that was John D. Ireland's translation. 让我们以入世于27 John D. Ireland 英语版本的翻译就是这个寄送作为我们今天讲座的结语。对于一个以正样培养无量慈心的人，会见正内心执着的坏灭。若是以清净之心，即使只对一个众生真诚的发慈心祝愿，这样的慈善就已经在累积功德。但圣者对一切众生皆怀有慈悲之心，既已累积无量的功德。那些征服了大地及其众生的王者，主办盛大的祭祀、马祭、人祭、水供、 罗马祭以及所谓无遮祭，但这些祭祀的功德都不及修习自信者的1/16。一个驻足自信的人，他们的功德就像明月当空，让满天的星光都黯淡无光，越不伤害生命，也不教唆他人伤害，没有征服，也不令他人战争，对一切有情皆心，怀慈善，对所有众生都无有敌意。So that ends the main talk. We had one question left over from last time. If Kathy wants to put that up, or Janice.
Thank you, Bante, very much for your teaching today. We can go over the last questions. So the questions that we have was, how do we decide whether an action is kusala or akusala? Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Yeah.
请问如何抉择何为善法，何为恶不善法？
Okay. So, 所以这是有比较简单的回答，也有比较复杂的回答。所以如果需要简单的话，我们可以说有贪吃的心态都算不善法。但是怎么理解我的心里有贪吃呢？那比较复杂。So this question has simple answer and more complicated answer. And the simple answer is if your mind has lobha, dosa, moha, greed, hatred, or delusion present in it, then we know it's an akusala mind state. However, how to understand whether those things are there or not is a little more complicated. I'll give just a brief introduction to that. 所以怎么理解？就是我们需要看我们现在的心态将会导致什么结果。就是如果会危害自己或者危害其他人，我们就知道这是不善的法。但是因为吃就是贪欲和嗔恨，这是比较明显，但是吃非常非常难怎么说理解就是因为吃的素质就是淹没我们的智慧，征服我们的智慧，所以如果吃存在，我们的智慧很弱。So if we want to understand whether our mind states are wholesome or unwholesome, we have to consider what kind of actions, mental, verbal, or physical actions that those kinds of thoughts might lead to. And so if they're going to lead to some kind of action that harms ourselves or harms others, then we know that this comes under the akusala group, the unwholesome group. Now, with the first two, this greed and hatred, they're easier to understand. But the third one, this delusion, is much more complicated because delusion has the character of covering up and overcoming our wisdom. And so when we have this delusion there, we don't understand things as they actually are. And so we're more likely to deceive ourselves and to believe that our mind is in a wholesome, in a kusala state when it's really in an akusala state. 所以这需要比较多的禅修可以深层理解这样的状况，但是我觉得这个比较 简短的回答今天就够了。So I think it takes some experience in meditation to be able to discern these things. I think for today we'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Bante. So if you have a question, you can submit to the Q&A or chat.
I don't see any more questions, so may Bante lead us in making aspiration and sharing merit, please. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Idam me punyang
Idam me punyam
asavakaya
asawakaya
vahang hotu.
waham hotu.
Idam me punyang
Idam me punyam
nibbanasa
nibbanassa
acciyo hotu.
vajayo hotu.
Mama punya bhagam
Mama punya bhagam
sambasatanam
sambasatanam
bhajami
bhajami
me sambe
te sabe
me samang
me samam
punya bhagam
punya bhagam
labantu.
labantu.
Sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
It looks like there's one question there. I think if we're a bit over time, but should we look at the question or leave it for next time?
I think Bante was acknowledged. Thank you for the answer. That David.
Oh, I see. Okay. Oh, that's all it is.
Right. Thank you, Bante.
Okay.
Thank you again, Bante. Thank you, Bante, for your teaching. Please feel free to leave Zoom at your convenience. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. We have a few announcements to make. We will meet in 2 weeks, same time on August 17, Sunday, August 17 evening in US and Monday, August 18 morning in Asia for Bante Jinaratana teaching lesson number 3. Next week, it will be Sayadaw Kumara Vivamsa teaching on Buddha and his disciple, his great disciple on the third great disciple, Venerable Kondana. It will be half an hour earlier on Saturday, August 9 evening in US and Sunday, August 10 morning in Asia. We sincerely thanks to Sister Pauline Su and Sister Melody Tang, added English and Chinese caption to Venerable Jinaratana teaching. The caption video is available at Pa'ao, Georgia YouTube now. Please check out our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook. Any further questions or inquiries, please feel free to email us. Thank you everyone for your time and participation, and may all be well, happy, and healthy. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.